It was one of those late summer nights that felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to go terribly wrong. The kind of night where the air felt too thick and the shadows seemed to be watching you. So when my phone buzzed at 2:30 a.m., I wasn't exactly surprised. Was I irritated? Sure, but surprised, not a chance. I rolled over in bed, half expecting it to be a call about some drunk kid throwing a punch at the local dive bar or a missing cat case that the owner swore had been stolen by the government. Yes, that happened once. But no, this one was different. The text on my phone read, "We've got a body down by the river. Might want to take a look." Great. Nothing like starting your day knee-deep in a murder case. I groaned, pulled myself out of bed, and threw on my jacket. My wife, Lisa, stirred under the covers.
Another one?
She muttered, not even bothering to open her eyes. Yeah, looks like it. Hopefully this one won't involve any conspiracy theories about the mayor's lizard twin, I said while zipping up and heading for the door.
Well, good luck with that.
She muttered before drifting back to sleep. She had a point. I'd been a detective for 15 years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the crazier the case, the more likely it is that someone's going to claim it's the work of aliens, ghosts, or, and this is my personal favorite, the Illuminati. I arrived at the riverbank around 3 a.m. Flashing lights lit up the trees like some twisted Christmas display, and the scene was already swarming with uniforms. I could smell the river's muddy stench before I even got out of the car. Officer Morales, a new guy with a nervous energy that suggested he wasn't entirely sure what to do with his hands, waved me over.
Detective Reynolds, you're going to want to see this.
He led me down the embankment to where the body was found. It was a young guy, maybe 21, 22, lying face down in the muck. His clothes were soaked through, and his skin had taken on that bloated, pale look that only happens when someone's been in the water way too long. A drowning? I asked, already bored. However, after glancing at the other officers nearby, Morales said the following.
That's what we thought. Until we found this.
He pointed to the nearest tree, and that's when I saw it. A bright yellow spray-painted smiley face, big and sloppy, right on the trunk. The paint was fresh. Smiley face killer? I said with a raised eyebrow. Didn't think that guy was still around.
He's not.
Morales replied, looking confused.
This is something different. I mean, the smiley face killer thing's an urban legend, right? But this, I don't know, man. Feels like someone's trying to send a message.
Of course, it's always a message. People can't just murder without trying to make some grand statement. I crouched down to get a closer look at the body. There was no sign of struggle, no obvious wounds. Just a dead kid who'd probably gone for a swim and gotten unlucky. The smiley face thing? That was just a coincidence. It had to be, right? Well, better get the coroner down here. But my guess? Drowning. Maybe the smiley face is some punk playing a prank. Kids these days are real into irony. Morales nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes.
Yeah, maybe. But there's something else. Found this next to the body.
He handed me a crumpled piece of paper, soggy from the river. I unfolded it carefully. Scrawled in messy black ink were 4 words. Laugh now, cry later. Fantastic. Now we've got a killer who thinks they're a philosopher. Okay, so maybe it's not just a prank, I muttered, shoving the note into an evidence bag. Let's get this to the lab and see if they can pull any prints or DNA. Morales nodded again, clearly relieved that I wasn't brushing it off completely. I couldn't blame him. Even if this was a straightforward drowning, the whole smiley face and creepy note thing made it weird enough to keep an eye on. Morales, I said, giving him a quick nod. I'll handle this one. Let the guys know to wrap up, but don't spook anyone. The last thing we need is a full-blown media frenzy over some nutcase leaving smiley faces at crime scenes. As I drove home, my mind kept wandering back to the note. Laugh now, cry later. What kind of message was that? Was this some sick joke? Or was there something more to it? Either way, I had a feeling this wasn't going to be the last smiley face I'd see. I was back at the station by 9 a.m., running on nothing but caffeine and the grim determination of someone who'd been doing this job too long to quit. Lisa sent me a text asking if I'd be home for dinner. I responded with a non-committal maybe and focused on the case files piling up on my desk. The lab results came back faster than expected. No prints on the note, no DNA, clean. Whoever this guy was, he knew how to cover his tracks, but that didn't mean I was going to give up. I'd seen too many killers think they were smarter than the cops, only to slip up because they got cocky. And something about that stupid smiley face told me this one had an ego bigger than his IQ. I spent the rest of the day combing through old case files. Unsolved drownings, disappearances near rivers, anything that might hint at a pattern. And of course, I couldn't resist pulling up the files on the so-called smiley face killer. Now, for those of you not in the know, the smiley face killer is basically an urban legend, a theory that's been floating around for years. According to some people, a serial killer, or maybe a group of them, was responsible for the drownings of dozens of young men across the country, and at each crime scene, a smiley face was found nearby. The theory's been debunked about 100 times, but that didn't stop the internet from losing its collective mind over it. Everyone loves a good conspiracy. Still, this wasn't the work of some long-dead serial killer. I wasn't chasing a ghost. This was real, and the smiley face wasn't just a coincidence. By the time I was ready to call it a night, I had a theory. It wasn't exactly groundbreaking, but it was something. Whoever this guy was, he was trying to mimic the smiley face killer. Maybe he was obsessed with the case. Maybe he thought it was funny. Or maybe, just maybe, he was trying to prove that the urban legend was real. I was halfway through that thought when my phone buzzed again. Another body. The scene was almost identical. A young man in his mid-20s was found floating in the river with a bright yellow smiley face spray painted on the nearest tree. This time, the note read, "Who's laughing now?" Great. A comedian, I muttered as I crouched by the body. Officer Morales was there again, looking more rattled than usual.
Same MO detective. A smiley face, a note, and no signs of struggle.
I stared at the smiley face. It was sloppy, almost rushed. Whoever was doing this didn't care about getting caught. Or worse, they thought they wouldn't be. We've got a copycat on our hands. I said, more to myself than to Morales.
A copycat.
Morales asked, frowning.
You think this is tied to the smiley face killer?
Not exactly. I replied, standing up and brushing the dirt off my pants. I think we've got someone who wants us to think it's tied to the smiley face killer. Someone who's playing a game.
A game?
Morales looked like he'd swallowed a bug.
With people's lives?
Yeah, I said, grimacing. And we're not laughing. As we processed the scene, a thought crept into my mind. What if this wasn't just some sicko trying to recreate an old urban legend? What if there was something more going on, something darker? I mean, people don't just wake up one day and decide to start murdering strangers and leaving smiley faces everywhere, right? The next few weeks were a blur. More bodies, more smiley faces, more notes. And the media. Oh, they loved it. The laughing man, they called him. Some jerk on a morning talk show even cracked a joke about it, saying something like, "At least he's got a sense of humor." Yeah, real funny, buddy. Meanwhile, I was drowning in evidence that led nowhere. The laughing man was careful. No prints, no DNA, no witnesses. He knew what he was doing, and he wasn't about to slip up. At least, not yet. But the notes, those stupid, smug notes, were starting to get under my skin. Laugh now, cry later. Who's laughing now? It was like the guy was taunting me. He knew I was chasing him, and he wanted me to know that he was always one step ahead. I was sitting in my office late one night, staring at the latest case file, when my phone buzzed again. Another text, another body. But this time, the note was addressed to me, Detective Reynolds. I'm waiting for you to laugh. And just like that, the game changed. If there's one thing I hate more than early mornings, it's the kind of text messages that make you regret your entire career. The laughing man was playing with me now, and that's never a good sign. Killers with a flair for the dramatic are the worst. They're like theater kids, but with knives. The note from the last crime scene. My note was still rattling around in my head. Detective Reynolds, I'm waiting for you to laugh. Laugh? At what? At the fact that another kid was dead and the media was treating it like some kind of weird joke? Yeah, it's really hilarious. I'll be sure to schedule a chuckle once I catch this guy. But until then, no thanks. The days after that note dragged on in the worst way possible. Every morning, I woke up expecting another call, another body, another bright yellow smiley face grinning at me, like I was the punchline to some sick joke. And every time I got that call, I felt the weight in my gut grow heavier. I was beginning to wonder if this guy was ever going to slip up. The media, of course, was eating it up. The laughing man had become a local sensation, and not in the way you'd hope. Every talking head on TV had an opinion. Some thought he was a genius mastermind, others figured he was just some loser with too much time on his hands. But no one really understood what we were dealing with. Hell, I wasn't even sure I did. One night, a week after the last body, I was sitting at my desk in the precinct, staring at the notes from all the scenes. There wasn't a lot to go on. The only thing linking the victims was the method drowning. All the bodies had been found by the river, and every one of them had a smiley face nearby, spray painted in that same ugly yellow. It felt like we were dealing with a ghost. No evidence, no leads, just some deranged killer laughing at us from the shadows. I rubbed my eyes and leaned back in my chair, trying to push the frustration down. Lisa had sent me a message earlier, asking when I'd be home. I hadn't replied yet because honestly, I didn't know. I hadn't been home much since the laughing man started his twisted little game, and I wasn't sure when I'd be able to stop chasing this guy long enough to sleep in my own bed. Just as I was about to pack it in for the night, my phone buzzed. For a split second, I hoped it was Lisa. Maybe she'd tell me to come home, that she missed me, something normal for once. But nope, of course it wasn't her. It was another text, and it wasn't from anyone I wanted to hear from. The message was short, just like the notes at the crime scenes. But this one felt personal. Marky Mark. Still not laughing? I thought you liked jokes. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my brain doing that thing where it couldn't quite process what it was seeing. This guy knew my name, not just Detective Reynolds like on the note at the scene. No, he was on a first-name basis now, and he thought this was funny. Before I could even process the anger bubbling up inside me, the phone buzzed again. Another message. Guess you're more of a serious type. That's okay, you'll laugh soon enough. My hands tightened around the phone. I felt that familiar sense of frustration rising, but this time it wasn't just frustration, it was fear too. I didn't like admitting that. Hell, I hated admitting that. But there it was, creeping up my spine like ice water. This wasn't just some random psycho out there killing strangers anymore. This was someone who knew me, who was watching me, and who thought this was all some big joke. I fired off a quick reply before I could stop myself. "Who the hell are you?" No response. Figures. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't about to make it easy. Still, the fact that he'd reached out to me directly meant something. He was getting bolder, sloppier maybe. At least that's what I had to tell myself. He wasn't just content with killing and leaving his little smiley faces behind. He wanted to play with me, which meant eventually he was going to screw up. Well, that's what I hoped anyway. The next day, I called a meeting with my team. Morales was there, as usual, looking about as sleep-deprived as I felt. I swear, the kid had more coffee in his system than blood at this point. "All right," I said, pacing in front of the whiteboard where we'd laid out all the details of the case. "Here's what we know. The laughing man's escalating. He's taunting us now. Hell, he's taunting me directly. That means he's getting cocky. And cocky killers make mistakes." Morales raised a hand like we were in grade school or something.
Sir, didn't the smiley face killer supposedly taunt police too? Left messages and stuff?
I shot him a look. Yeah, Morales, but the smiley face killer's an urban legend. This guy's real. And we're going to catch him. Now, here's what we need to focus on: the victims. We haven't found any clear connections between them yet, but I'm betting there's something. We're missing something. I turned to the whiteboard and tapped my pen against it, thinking. What was the link? What tied these kids together besides the fact that they all ended up face down in the river with a smiley face grinning over their bodies? Run the victims again, I said, turning back to the room. Dig into their lives. Friends, family, hobbies, jobs. I don't care if you have to interview their next-door neighbor's cousin's dog walker. There's something we're not seeing, and we're not going to find it by sitting on our hands. As the team dispersed, I caught Morales by the door. "Morales, you've been good on this case. Keep your head on straight, all right?" He blinked at me, clearly surprised by the compliment.
Thanks, Detective. I'm trying. It's just, this whole thing is kind of freaky.
Freaky. I let out a dry laugh. This is nothing. Wait until you get a case where the murder weapon's a literal clown nose. You'll be begging for a regular freaky case. I gave him a pat on the back and sent him on his way, but his words stuck with me. He wasn't wrong. This was freaky. The laughing man was playing a game, and we were the pieces. The real question was, how long could we stay in the game before one of us lost? Two days later, we got a break. Morales, bless his over-caffeinated heart, found something.
Detective Reynolds.
He practically burst into my office, a file in hand.
You're gonna want to see this.
I raised an eyebrow, setting down the cold cup of coffee I'd been nursing. What is it, Morales? Another theory about how the Illuminati's involved. He shook his head, looking way too excited for his own good.
No, sir. I found a connection between the victims.
I sat up straighter. Now this was interesting. All right, kid, lay it on me. Morales slapped the file down on my desk and flipped it open. Inside were photos of the victims, nothing I hadn't seen before. But next to each one was a small piece of paper, a printed email or text message.
All the victims,
Morales said, pointing to the papers.
Received strange messages in the days leading up to their deaths. They're all cryptic, but similar enough that I think it's our guy. Check this out.
I picked up one of the messages. It was an email sent to the first victim a week before he died. The subject line read, "Laugh now." The body of the email was blank. I frowned. Where'd you get this?
Friends and family of the victims.
Morales said, looking a little too proud of himself.
I dug around and asked them if anyone had been in contact with the victims before they died. Turns out they all got these weird messages.
I flipped through the other papers. Morales was right. Every victim had received some variation of the same message. Laugh now or who's laughing. Always cryptic, always sent just days before they were found dead. Well, I'll be damned, I muttered, leaning back in my chair. Looks like we've got ourselves a pattern. The discovery of the messages gave us something to work with, finally. We traced the emails and texts as best we could, but they all led to dead ends. Burner phones, faked email addresses, all the usual tricks. But still, we had a pattern now, and that was more than we'd had before. I spent the next few days glued to my desk, poring over the details, trying to find something, anything, that would give us a lead. Every time I started to feel like I was getting somewhere, I'd get another text from the laughing man. More taunts, more jokes. Having fun yet. Bet you're laughing now. I wasn't laughing. I wasn't even close. But I was starting to get angry. This guy thought he could play me, thought he could turn this into some kind of sick joke. But I wasn't going to let him win. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the laughing man took it up a notch. It was late, close to midnight, when my phone buzzed again. I was half expecting another taunt, but this time it wasn't just a message. It was a photo, a picture of my house. My wife's car was parked in the driveway. The message read, "Laugh now, detective, or she's next." I've received a lot of messed up messages in my life, but that photo of my house, that was a whole new level of personal. Seeing Lisa's car parked in the driveway, knowing the laughing man was out there, watching her, watching us, it hit differently. This wasn't just some twisted cat and mouse game anymore. This was a threat, a serious one. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. But fear's funny, you know. It either makes you run or it makes you angry. And I was way past the point of running. If this guy thought he could scare me into backing down, he clearly didn't know me very well. Still, I wasn't about to take any chances. I called Lisa immediately, trying to keep my voice steady, even though I could feel the fear bubbling up in my chest.
Hey babe, it's late.
She answered, her voice tired.
Are you coming home soon?
Yeah. I lied, pacing my office. Listen, do me a favor, okay? Lock the doors, close the windows, and don't go outside for anything. There was a pause on the other end.
Mark, what's going on?
Nothing. Just do it for me, all right? I'll explain when I get home. Another pause, and then she sighed.
All right. But this better not be one of those overreacting things. You know how you get.
I forced a laugh, even though there was nothing funny about this. I know. Just humor me. I'll be home soon. As soon as I hung up, I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. I couldn't afford to sit around in my office anymore. The laughing man had crossed a line, and if he thought he could go after my family, he had another thing coming. I drove home like a man possessed, glancing at the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see a shadowy figure following me. Paranoia was creeping in, and I hated it. I was supposed to be in control, supposed to be the one hunting this guy down. But now, it felt like he was pulling all the strings, and I was just dancing along to his sick tune. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house was dark. Lisa had done what I asked. Everything was locked up tight, windows closed, blinds drawn. I sat in the car for a minute, staring at the house, wondering if the laughing man was out there, hiding in the shadows, watching me. And that's when it hit me. He was watching me. He had been this whole time. Every move I made, every step in the investigation, he'd been one step ahead. and now he was getting personal. Well, two could play that game. I got out of the car and walked up to the house, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I stepped inside, Lisa was there, arms crossed, looking at me like I'd lost my mind.
All right, what's going on?
She said, leaning against the doorframe. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I wanted to downplay it, make it sound like it wasn't a big deal, but I couldn't lie to her. Not about this. There's a guy, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He's been taunting me, sending messages, leaving notes. And now he sent me a photo of the house, of your car. Lisa's face paled.
What? Why didn't you tell me sooner?
I didn't want to scare you, I admitted. I thought I could handle it. But this is different. He's getting bolder. She stared at me for a moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Lisa wasn't one to panic easily, but this was a lot to handle. Finally, she nodded, her expression hardening.
All right, what do we do?
I couldn't help but smile a little at that. Leave it to Lisa to be the calm one when everything is falling apart. We lock everything down, I said. I've got guys watching the house. You're not going anywhere alone, and I'm going to catch this guy. The next few days were tense, to say the least. Lisa kept her distance from me, not because she was angry, but because I think she was trying to process everything. I couldn't blame her. Having a deranged killer fixate on your family tends to throw a wrench in your day-to-day routine. Meanwhile, I threw myself into the investigation, trying to make sense of the pattern Morales had uncovered. The messages sent to the victims before their deaths, the cryptic notes, it all pointed to the laughing man being someone who knew them, or at least someone who had access to their personal information. But that wasn't the part that bothered me. No, what bothered me was that he knew me. He knew my name and knew where I lived. Hell, he knew enough about my life to threaten my wife, and that meant he wasn't just some random psycho picking victims off the street. This was personal. I spent hours going over every detail of the case, trying to find the connection. There had to be something linking the victims, something I hadn't seen yet. But every time I thought I was getting close, the pieces slipped away, like trying to grab smoke. And then, just when I was ready to call it a night, my phone buzzed again. Another text. I didn't want to open it. I knew it was him. Knew it was going to be more of the same taunting, the same smug, twisted humor. But I couldn't ignore it either, not after everything that had happened. With a sigh, I unlocked my phone and looked at the message. Miss me? Thought you could lock me out? Guess again. Smile. Attached to the message was another photo. This one wasn't of my house. It was of my office at the precinct. My desk, my files, everything. My blood went cold. He'd been in the station. In my office. The realization hit me like a freight train. This guy wasn't just some random killer. He had access. He knew things he shouldn't know. And he was getting bolder by the minute. I sprang out of my chair, heart pounding, and raced back to the precinct. The night shift was sparse. Just a couple of officers working the front desk and a few others handling paperwork. I burst into my office, half expecting to find something waiting for me. And there it was. A bright yellow smiley face was spray painted on the wall behind my desk. Jesus Christ. I muttered under my breath, staring at the grinning face. The laughing man had been here, right here in my office, mocking me. I could almost hear him laughing, could almost feel the smugness radiating off that stupid yellow paint. Morales came rushing in behind me, eyes wide.
Detective? What happened?
I pointed at the wall. He was here. The laughing man. He got into the station, into my office. How the hell did no one see him? Morales looked pale.
I don't know, sir. We've got cameras, security.
Well, clearly your security isn't worth much if he can waltz in here and leave me a smiley face. I snapped, more frustrated than anything. This guy was slipping through our fingers, and now he was getting cocky. The days that followed were a blur. I barely slept, barely ate, barely did anything other than obsess over the laughing man. I was losing control of the situation, and I knew it. The case was slipping away from me, and with every new message, every new taunt, I could feel the noose tightening. Lisa tried to talk to me a few times, but I wasn't much for conversation. How was I supposed to explain that I felt like I was fighting a ghost? That every time I thought I was getting closer, the laughing man would do something to throw me off balance again? The worst part? He was enjoying it. I could feel it in every text, every message. He was having fun with this, and that made me hate him even more. Morales was holding up better than I expected. He'd become my right-hand man through this whole mess, and though he looked about as sleep-deprived as I did, he hadn't cracked yet. At least, not outwardly. Any updates on the emails? I asked one afternoon, leaning back in my chair and rubbing my temples. I had a headache that felt like it was going to split my skull in two. Morales shook his head.
No luck. Everything's still coming from dead accounts and burner phones. This guy's covering his tracks well.
Of course he is, I muttered, glaring at the smiley face on my office wall. I hadn't had it removed yet. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed the reminder that he was still out there, still taunting me. Morales glanced at the wall too, his face tense.
You think he's watching us? Like right now?
I shrugged, even though the thought had been keeping me up at night. Probably. He's been one step ahead this whole time. Why stop now? The next time I got a text from the laughing man, it wasn't just a photo or a taunt. It was an address, a warehouse on the outskirts of town, and the message attached: come alone. Let's see if you can laugh now. I stared at the message, my heart racing. This was it. He was finally making his move. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Didn't want to risk spooking him. Besides, this was personal now. The laughing man had crossed too many lines. It was time to end this. The warehouse was exactly what I expected. Dark, abandoned, and covered in graffiti. I parked my car a few blocks away and approached cautiously, my hand on my gun. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, the place was empty, dusty, smelled like mildew and rot. But there, in the center of the floor, was something that made my blood run cold. A chair. And in the chair, tied up and gagged, was Morales. Jesus Christ. I muttered, rushing over to him. He was unconscious, a trickle of blood running down the side of his face. I checked his pulse, still alive, but barely. And then, from behind me, I heard it. A slow, mocking laugh. The kind of laugh that made my skin crawl.
Well now, Mark,
A voice said, dripping with amusement.
I was starting to think you weren't going to show.
I turned slowly, my hand still on my gun, and there he was. The laughing man, wearing a grotesque smiley face mask, his eyes gleaming with sick pleasure.
Let's see who gets the last laugh, shall we?
Have you ever had one of those moments where your whole life flashes before your eyes? They make it sound all dramatic in the movies, but in reality, it's more like a highlight reel of all the stupid decisions you've made. Like the time I thought I could win a chili eating contest in college, or when I decided to go after the laughing man alone. You know, the little things. Standing in that musty, abandoned warehouse, face to face with the laughing man while Morales was tied up in a chair behind me, I felt like I'd finally crossed the line from detective to idiot. And let me tell you, the view from the other side wasn't pretty. The laughing man, still wearing that grotesque smiley face mask, stood just a few feet away, hands in his pockets like we were old friends catching up at a coffee shop. The mask was cracked and chipped at the edges, but the oversized grin was still there, mocking me. And behind those empty eye holes, cold, calculating eyes, just enjoying the show.
Well, you made it.
He said, his voice muffled behind the mask, but still dripping with smugness.
I was starting to think you didn't care anymore.
Oh, trust me, I care. I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I care so much that I'm about to put a bullet in your head if you don't let him go. He chuckled, slow and deliberate, like he'd been rehearsing it.
Always so serious, detective. That's your problem. No sense of humor.
I tightened my grip on my gun, trying to focus. I had to stay calm, but Morales, he was bleeding, barely conscious, tied up like some kind of bait, and I'd walked right into it. How about this for a joke? I said, taking a slow step forward. You let him go, and I'll only break some of your bones. The laughing man tilted his head like he was actually considering it.
Tempting. But no, I think we're past negotiations, don't you?
I took another step, trying to keep him talking, buying time to figure out a plan. You know, for a guy who leaves smiley faces everywhere, you're really not that funny. That got a laugh out of him. An actual honest-to-God laugh.
Oh, I like that one, Mark. You're getting better. Maybe we can work on your material once this is all over.
Yeah, well, I'm booked solid for the rest of my life. Gonna be busy locking you up, I said, inching closer. I glanced at Morales, still out of it, but breathing. That was something. The laughing man sighed like he was disappointed.
You really don't get it, do you? This isn't about me getting caught. This isn't about you winning. This is.
He waved a hand around as if to emphasize the empty warehouse.
This is about the game. About the chase. You think you've been hunting me, but the truth is, Mark, you're just another player.
And I'm about to end the game, I said, raising the gun and aiming right at his chest. Last chance. Let him go. He didn't move. Didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head again, like he was waiting for something. Then I heard it. The faintest sound behind me. Too quiet, too subtle, but just enough to set off the alarm bells in my head. I spun around, just in time to see a shadow move out from behind one of the pillars. Another figure dressed in black, wearing a matching smiley face mask, was sneaking up on me. Before I could react, he lunged forward, tackling me to the ground. My gun skittered across the floor as we hit the concrete, and the breath knocked out of me. I struggled, but the guy was fast, stronger than he looked. His hands wrapped around my throat, squeezing, and I could feel the edges of panic creeping in. I wasn't ready to die. Not here. Not like this. I thrashed beneath the guy, desperately trying to get him off me, but my vision was already starting to blur. The laughing man was still watching, just standing there, like this was the most entertaining show he'd ever seen. My lungs screamed for air, and I knew, if I didn't do something now, this was it. My hand scrambled along the floor, searching, feeling for anything I could use. And then, my fingers brushed something cold, something metal. The gun. I didn't think. I didn't have time to. With one last burst of strength, I grabbed the gun, twisted around, and fired. The sound echoed in the warehouse, and the guy on top of me went limp. His hands loosened from my throat, and I shoved him off, gasping for air. My vision swam, my heart pounding in my ears, but I was alive. I scrambled to my feet, gun still in hand, and pointed it at the laughing man. He hadn't moved, If anything, he looked pleased.
Well done, Mark.
He said, clapping slowly.
I was beginning to think you'd lost your edge.
I wiped the blood from my mouth, glaring at him. It's over. No more games.
Oh, but this is the best part. The part where you finally realize it was never about winning or losing. It was about you.
He said, throwing his arms out wide. What the hell are you talking about? I snapped, my voice raw from the fight. My finger hovered over the trigger, itching to end this.
Think about it.
He said, taking a step closer.
All those victims. All those smiley faces. Who do you think I was really trying to reach? It wasn't them, Mark. It was always you.
I blinked, confused, trying to make sense of his words. What do you mean? He chuckled again, that same slow, deliberate laugh.
You really don't remember, do you?
Remember what, you crazy bastard? I shouted, my frustration boiling over. He reached up, slowly removing the mask, and for the first time I saw his face. And that's when it hit me. It wasn't just some random guy standing in front of me. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone I knew. Someone from my past. Carter? I breathed, my mind reeling. But you were.
One of your first cases.
He said, smiling that same twisted grin.
A long time ago. I was just a kid then. Barely 18. And you let me go.
I staggered back, the weight of the realization crashing down on me. I remembered him. Carter Wallace. I'd arrested him years ago for some petty theft, but he'd been young and scared. He'd cried and begged for a second chance, and I, like an idiot, had given him one. You've been doing all of this? Because of that? I asked, my voice hoarse.
Not just because of that.
He said, his grin widening.
Because of what you represent. You're the one who let me slip through the cracks. You're the reason I'm free. And now I get to show you what happens when you make a mistake.
I shook my head, unable to process it. This is insane. You killed people. Innocent people.
Oh, they weren't innocent.
He said, his voice darkening.
They were just like me. Lost. Forgotten. And you? You didn't care. You didn't laugh.
That's why you did it? I asked, my anger flaring again. Because I didn't laugh? He shrugged.
In a way. You didn't care then, so I made you care now. And look at us. Here we are, at the end of it all. Isn't it poetic?
Poetic? This guy was out of his damn mind. And yet, somehow I felt responsible. I'd let him go all those years ago, and now, this was the result. But I couldn't let that guilt control me. Not now. You're done, Carter. I said, raising the gun again. It's over. He just smiled, stepping closer.
You still don't get it, do you? It's never over. Not for you.
Before I could react, he lunged forward, faster than I expected. I fired, but he was already on me, knocking the gun out of my hand and tackling me to the ground. We struggled, his hands around my throat again, but this time I was ready. I drove my knee into his side hard and he gasped, his grip loosening just enough for me to shove him off. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the gun, and pointed it at him again. But he didn't move. Didn't even flinch. He just laughed.
Go ahead, Mark. Finish it.
He said, his voice raspy. My finger tightened on the trigger. I could end this. Right here, right now. I could stop him from hurting anyone else. But I didn't. Instead, I called for backup. Within minutes, the The warehouse was swarming with officers, and Carter was in cuffs, still laughing to himself like it was all one big joke. Back at the precinct, Morales was recovering, sitting up in the hospital bed, looking like he'd just been run over by a truck twice. He had a nasty cut on his head and some bruises, but he was going to be fine. Thank God for that. After everything, it was good to have at least one thing go right.
Well, if this is what getting promoted looks like, I might just stick to patrol.
Morales joked, his voice a little weak, but still carrying that familiar, dry humor. I snorted, leaning against the doorframe. Yeah, you'd probably have fewer psychos trying to kill you. He shook his head, grimacing as he touched the bandage on his forehead.
You sure know how to throw a welcoming party, though. I feel like I missed the punchline.
I couldn't help but smirk. You didn't miss much. Just a guy in a creepy mask and a whole lot of bad jokes.
Yeah, speaking of bad jokes, are you gonna tell me why this guy had it in for you?
Morales asked, his tone turning serious. His eyes were filled with curiosity, and who could blame him? He'd been dragged into this mess without knowing the whole story. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. It was all still sinking in. Carter Wallace. I arrested him years ago, back when I was fresh on the force. He was just a kid shoplifting stupid stuff. I let him off easy, I thought. I was giving him a second chance. Morales frowned.
And now he's the laughing man?
Yeah, I let out a humorless laugh. Looks like my second chance turned into a nightmare. He was quiet for a moment, processing it all. Then he shook his head.
You can't blame yourself, detective. He made his own choices. You couldn't have known.
Doesn't make it any easier. But thanks, I muttered. Just then, there was a knock at the door, and one of the officers poked his head in.
Detective Reynolds, they've got him in holding. Thought you'd want to know.
I nodded. Thanks. I'll be there in a minute. Morales raised an eyebrow.
You're going to see him?
Yeah, I said, pushing myself off the wall. I need to. Don't worry, I won't let him get in my head. When I walked into the holding room, Carter was sitting at the small metal table, hands cuffed in front of him. The smiley face mask was gone now, replaced by his real face. Just an ordinary guy in his late 20s with a scruffy beard and a calm expression. If you didn't know any better, you'd think he was just some regular guy waiting for a traffic ticket. But I knew better.
Why, hello there, Mark.
He said, smiling when he saw me.
Glad you could make it. I was worried you'd let someone else take the credit for catching me.
I sat down across from him, folding my arms on the table. Why do it? I asked, cutting straight to the chase. Why all of this? The smiley faces, the notes, the murders. What was the point? He shrugged, leaning back in his chair like he was at a casual lunch.
I told you already. It was never about them. It was about you. I wanted you to see the joke, to understand what it feels like to be forgotten, to be just another file on a desk.
I didn't forget you, I said, my voice low. I gave you a chance to change your life. His smile widened.
And look at me now. I did change. I became something more than just another criminal. I became your obsession, your shadow.
I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. You killed people, Carter. Innocent people. Do you think that makes you special? All it does is make you a coward. For the first time, his smile faltered, just a bit.
Coward? I'm not the one who spent years chasing ghosts, Mark. I'm the one who made you chase me.
He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper.
And now, Even though you caught me, I'll always be there. Every time you see a smiley face, every time you hear someone laugh, you'll think of me. I'll be in your head forever.
I stared at him, my stomach twisting in knots. He was right, in a way. Even though he was sitting here, locked up, he'd still won in some sick, twisted sense. He'd gotten under my skin, and that's exactly what he'd wanted. But I couldn't let him have the satisfaction of knowing that. "You're not in my head, Carter," I said, standing up. "You're just another case. Another file I'm going to close. And once you're behind bars, I'm going to forget about you." He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes.
You keep telling yourself that, Mark. Let's see how long it lasts.
I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of Carter's soft, mocking laughter following me out the door. Carter Wallace was charged with multiple counts of murder, among other things. The case went to trial, and the media had a field day with it. The laughing man had become a national headline, and for weeks it seemed like his grinning face was everywhere. On the news, in the papers, even plastered on some idiot's t-shirt that I passed on my way to work one morning. But eventually, like all things, the story died down. People moved on and found something else to talk about. And just like that, the laughing man became another headline lost in the shuffle. As for me, well, I tried to move on too. Tried to forget about the smiley faces and the notes and the way Carter had laughed at me in that holding room. But it wasn't easy. Some nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, half expecting to see that stupid yellow grin staring back at me from the shadows. Lisa helped though. She kept me grounded, made sure I didn't fall too far into the rabbit hole. She didn't say it outright, but I knew she was scared for me, scared that this case had changed me in ways I couldn't fix. Maybe it had. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I started to feel like myself again. I stopped checking over my shoulder every time I left the house, and stopped seeing smiley faces in every random scrawl of graffiti on the street. And for the first time in a long time, I laughed again. Really laughed. It wasn't much, just a stupid joke Morales had made about the precinct coffee tasting like motor oil. But it felt good. Like maybe, just maybe, I was finally getting my life back. One night, months after Carter's arrest, I was sitting at home with Lisa, watching some mindless TV show, when my phone buzzed. I frowned, picking it up, half expecting it to be some work thing. But it wasn't. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "Miss me yet?" My stomach dropped, and for a moment, I just stared at the screen, unable to process it. Then, another message came through. That one read, "Don't worry, Mark. I'm always watching." I didn't respond. Didn't need to. I knew what this was. Carter might have been locked up, but the laughing man, he was still out there. In my head. In the shadows. And maybe, just maybe, he always would be. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. If you'd like to support the channel and get exclusive content, consider joining my Patreon. The link is in the description. Thanks for watching.